IR changes. We're going to hear a speech from Anthony Albanese tonight. Now, it's broad brushstrokes at the moment. What do you think of him saying, if you're a gig economy worker, say you're working in Uber Eats and you're getting way below the minimum wage, that's not fair in today's Australia? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think Anthony Albanese's plan is one that will cut jobs and wages for many Australians. We need to both get more Australians into employment. They're taking the opportunity to get higher wages and higher benefits for themselves from working in the gig economy than they may get in traditional industries. And the approach that Anthony Albanese will take will cut those wages, cut those jobs, and, of course, deny young Australians particularly the opportunity to secure employment.
So what does that mean on gig economy workers? As I said, if, say, an Uber Eats driver that's found to be working way below minimum wage, is that just a case of, well, that's the risk you take. If you don't like the salary you get, don't do that job?
Well, we have to look at all of these situations carefully, but what we shouldn't be doing is imposing a plan that's advanced by the union's interests rather than by workers' interests. People work in flexible conditions for lots of different reasons, because they may seek flexibility around family or work life or study, and to just use broad brush approaches, suppress jobs growth, support wages growth under this Labor plan will only cut wages and jobs.
Right, but a lot of people took up these jobs because that's all they could get during a pandemic, and they found they were way below minimum wage. It's a pretty simple question as whether you think there should be some sort of legislated minimum wage for these workers. Are you saying there should not be?
We have a minimum wage in Australia, but people are obviously choosing different conditions. But it comes back to what the approach the Labor Party is taking, which is one where they want to impose a standard because they see it as in the interests of unions and regulators rather than the interests of workers. And my focus will always be on how we advance the opportunity to create jobs for young Australians, improve wages for young Australians, and put them in the best position to be able to secure employment rather than being dependent on welfare.
Just wanted to ask you finally about your campaign. You want more Australians to own their first home. You've focused on superannuation they should be able to access. If your focus is really on getting them into a home and a first home, are you also looking at, for example, incentives around people investing in houses?
Well, I wrote a whole book about this topic last year, Tom, as you may be aware, called The New Social Contract, identifying there are many challenges around home ownership and what's driving prices, from tax law, planning law and regulations, immigration, and, of course, things like interest rates, which are having an effect now. But there's only one policy that is making it harder for young Australians to save for a deposit, because they're having up tens of thousands of dollars of their money locked away in super rather than being able to be used for a home. It should be home first, super second, instead of what we have now.
One policy that you're saying directly impacts that deposit, but what about policy that affects how big that deposit needs to be? The big split, if you like, between house prices or property prices and wages and inflation occurred after 1999, when we had the capital gains tax discount changed. Is there a case to look at that? Are you willing to look at that as well in your campaign?
I've said consistently, and I wrote this in my book, that there needs to be tax reform as part of putting home ownership at the front of the discussion. But every year the cost of housing goes up on average since 2000 by $23,000. In terms of a 20% deposit, that's about $5,000 a year, which is equivalent to what young Australians contribute to super every year. There's only one policy that is making it harder for young Australians to be able to access their savings and buy their own home, and it's putting super ahead of.
You say there are all these different.
It should be home first,
measures.
Super second.
Yeah, is it just too hard to sell tax change on capital gains tax within the Liberal Party? Is that why you're focusing on super instead?
I'm focused on the biggest barrier that young Australians face with buying their own home, which is making sure they can save enough for a deposit. And that's why prioritising superannuation over home ownership is leading to a significant decline in home ownership amongst young Australians, and that's why it should be home first, super second.
Getting the motto out there. Tim Wilson, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.